Welcome to the Kennedy Report. I'm Kennedy Hall. Is Andrew Tate a false prophet? Well, yeah, he's a lot of things, and he's definitely one of those. I'm here with our friend Joe Boca, who give this guy some prayers because he's dealing with an apartment issue and living in the greater New York area. Finding the right apartment is like finding a soulmate. It's not easy to do.
Right now, I definitely don't have one, and I probably don't have the other either.
Oh goodness, Joe's gonna have to move to Canada. We got a spare room. He's gonna have to come up here. It's only about a 9-hour drive from you anyway.
From the frying pan into the fire, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Wear some flame retardant suit. Yeah. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know who Andrew Tate is, count yourself lucky. He's a former mixed martial artist, mainly a kickboxer. He has sort of made a splash in the manosphere, let's call it, with his anti-feminist, countercultural views on a lot of things. However, I'm not really a fan. I think he's sort of a stereotype of masculinity. Here's the thing. He says things, 95% of what he says is totally fine. It's just like feminism's bad and stand up straight and pull your bootstraps up and, don't be an idiot and be responsible. And that's just all the basic, Jordan Peterson shtick in a way. But he also opines on a lot of issues that are much more overtly spiritual. And recently, he made it clear that he went from being a Christian. I don't know how committed of a Christian he was. I think he was an Orthodox Christian, and to being a Muslim. And he had a clip with a guy named Zuby, who's a famous internet personality, who himself is a Christian and pretty smart, explaining why he did. And Joe and I had viewed that clip and it was really telling of how unintelligent his reasons were, and how he doesn't even really understand Islam, which Joe and I are going to talk about a little bit, and how Andrew Tate, he's extremely influential. He's inspiring millions of young men who are taking him very seriously, and he's giving them bad advice. Anything else we should add before we get into the clip, Joe?
No, let's get right into it. That's a good summary of our friend there.
Yes. Okay. So here's a clip with Zuby, who again is quite smart. And this does not mean that Zuby believes what Andrew Tate's going to say. I don't know what he believes. Well, actually, I know he's a Christian. I don't think he's a religiously indifferentist type Christian. I think he's pretty solid in his sort of African evangelical background beliefs. But nonetheless, Zuby was on a show, and it's a show, and Zuby said, Andrew Tate said what he wanted to say. Okay. Now there's a couple swear words in here. I don't have the capabilities of doing the beeping out of the swear words. I think there's only one or two. I apologize. So if you are in the, if you're worried about clutching your pearls, I'm warning you now that you might have to clutch them for 5 or 6 seconds of your life here. Okay. So let's watch, and we're going to kind of stop and go and kind of go through some of the things he's saying.
Something that I really wanted to discuss with you, actually, is faith. January 2019, on that podcast, you explicitly said, I am an atheist. Yes. And you've definitely been on some type of journey. Again, I've been listening to interviews and podcasts, and there was a time where, I don't know, when you went from atheism to saying, I think you believe in God, and I think you said Christianity is kind of cucked, but you'd probably Islam is the only religion that would potentially work for you. And then I know you started saying that you were a Christian and Orthodox, and now I'm hearing that you're a Muslim now, but talk me through it.
Sure. So firstly, I found scientific proof for God. I'm the man. Everyone's been sitting here, all the atheists saying there's no proof for God. I've got it.
Okay, let's stop.
Here's the scientific proof for God. I've got all of it. I think it's his third law. It might be a second. We'll have to look it up if it's third or second law. But one of Newton's law is that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. For every force, there's an equal and opposite force. Anyone who's perspicacious enough to look around them and sees the true evil in the world today understands that there must be an equal and opposite to that true evil, which is good, which means that God must be real. If all of the evil in the world today is the act of demons and devil, and people will try and pretend it isn't, but if you truly understood things like the elites making you miss your grandma's funeral to laugh at you, like cutting up the dicks of kids because of a psyop on the Disney Channel. When you truly understand the level of evil in the world today, then you must understand the only equal and opposite force can be God. Another thing I've argued with
Okay, so right off the bat, Joe, there's a couple issues with that.
Oh yes.
For one, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Joe, was this? Did you coin this term, the hermeneutic of charity?
Did I? I might have. I like to say, well, our friend Michael Lofton said the hermeneutic of suspicion. Yeah, I like the hermeneutic. I like the hermeneutic of dissent myself, but but yeah, I don't know. I won't take credit for it. I'll give you the credit.
Well, I think you said it, but so the hermeneutic of charity. So okay, the presence of preternatural evil is historically not a weak argument for believing in God, meaning there are plenty of people who have recognized a inhuman, maleficent reality that is inexplicable by any natural thing and say, holy mackerel, these claims about the devil must be true. And if that's true, wow, maybe the other stuff they're saying is true, and therefore they get to the point of accepting the Christian claims about God or something like that. So that's not wrong. The intuition there is not wrong. I'll give him that, okay? But what's wrong is he says it's the laws of Newton. For every force, there's an equal and opposite force. Right there, you've lost the argument. And if I was a smart atheist, they do exist, I think. There's a couple of them. If I was a smart atheist, I would say, if I knew my theology enough to argue it, I would say you didn't just argue for God. You argued for two gods, or you argued for angels. You argued for the devil, and you argued for Saint Michael. And the reason I say this is because there's a misconception of what evil is. Evil is not a positive created reality. Mm-hmm. As our friend Pastor Doug Wilson, we joke, no salvation outside the church except for Pastor Wilson. Yeah, exactly. We love him. He's a C.S. Lewis of our day, but with a little bit of that American cowboy in him, which just gives him a little bit more oomph to his message. Mm-hmm. Protestant, right about 99% of the things. Let's just hope he figures the 1% out. Anyway, he was saying on one of his shows that evil is always bent morality. It's always bent good. So an angel is good. It's all created things are good. We know this from Genesis. All created things are good. They become bad when they become perversions or deviations from the good. So even this idea that he said there's equal forces, that might be true physically. I don't know. I'm not a physicist, but I'm sure maybe it is. But it's not true in a sense of spirituality. It's not true in a sense of morality. Think about the most, think about someone, sexually assaulting someone. It's an evil. Okay, but it's not evil because there's a sexual act involved. It's evil because there's no consent. It's evil because it's forceful and it's violent. So it's something that's supposed to be good and it's bent. So evil's not a positive force. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so the analogy would be hot and cold, right? So
exactly.
Cold is not itself something. It's the absence of heat, right? And if you want to read something that's like really the one who defines this version of evil is St. Augustine in the Confessions. That's where it all comes from. So he has a correct intuition that evil exists, right? He's basically starting with it's odd. He's starting from it's a very strange argument in a way. It's like expositing the existence of God because we know that the devil is true. There's an intuitiveness about that's on point. So if you think of back in the 70s when the movie The Exorcist came out, everybody was scared out of their wits. They couldn't handle it. People were throwing up and fainting and all this sort of thing. Mostly secular people, but it's this idea that everybody knows the devil's, there's some evil force in the world, and those types of people are not clinging to the good and really have no defense against it. But from there, he says, well, equal, and the real problem with what he says is the term equal, right?
That's right.
And we'll get into how that's Gnostic and Manichaean to say that the good is an equal force to the evil. And I mean, really, if you've looked at any like basic routine 101 Christian apologetics, you basically just know that this is a rehashed form of the moral argument, basically.
Yeah, and okay, it's good you bring up Manichaeism. Manichaeism is an ancient heresy. It's a belief. Good you bring up that, but you also bring up St. Augustine, who was a Manichaean, and in some ways was very Andrew Tate-esque. Not to compare Andrew Tate and St. Augustine, but in his time before he was a committed Christian, Augustine was a womanizer, essentially, concubinage and mistresses and things. He was smart, very smart. People listened to him, he was very influential, but his philosophy was wrong. And he admits this. And he was a Manichaean for a time. So he believed that there were two gods, the God of light and the God of darkness. This is what Manichaeans believe, and they're equal and opposite forces, just like Andrew Tate says. And the God of light is the God of the spiritual world, and the God of darkness is the God of created things, essentially. So anyway, it gets weird after that. But there's a logic to it, which is why it was difficult to argue with for a while. But the thing that's appealing about it, and this is his next point that he said in this little clip here. He says, anyone who looks around knows that all the evil in the world is from Satan. That's what he says. All the evil in the world is from Satan. No, the vast majority of the evil in the world is from you. The plural generic you. The vast majority of the evil in the world is from personal choices. Satan did not bring evil into the garden. Satan brought a temptation to evil into the garden. Right. And Adam and Eve said yes. Yes, the Disney thing is probably satanically inspired. And I do believe elites worship Satan and things like that. This stuff is pretty manifest at this point. However, it's human beings who commit the vast majority of evil acts. This idea that the devil makes everything evil takes away personal responsibility for moral actions, which is part and parcel with Manichaeism, because it's not ultimately your fault, because there's just the God of darkness in you because you've been created and you need to escape from that. Mm-hmm. And this is the logic of this dualist perception of God. And this is ultimately what Andrew Tate is expositing. And it's not Islam. Muslims are radical monotheists. I mean, to the point where they think a trinity is polytheism. So they would not say there are two different gods. There's definitely a Gnostic element to Islam. It's because it's a mixed sort of heresy of a bunch of different things. But even this is not Islam that he's talking about. All right, I'm going to play the next part of the clip.
The atheists they don't understand that even God as a concept, even just as a concept, in and of himself becomes a real thing. If you have 1,000 people and those 1,000 people believe in a God, even if there's no man in the sky, but those 1,000 people believing in a God makes them act righteously, that even as a concept in and of itself, God is a real force. God, the idea as a force, is making the people act righteously. So God must exist in some form. So I understood that the thing that made me stop being an atheist is simply the amount of evil I saw around me. I was like, if this much evil, if Satan is going to appear, if Satan appears in front of you, you're going to have to say, okay, well then God must be real. And that's the point we got to. I realized there was so much evil and so much injustice. And so much specifically? It's just the endless, genuine, deliberate attempts at destroying the baseline morality of humans. Just making us believe that to the point where pedophilia isn't even bad anymore. Like incest is okay. Like things we know are wrong. We just innately know it's wrong. And they're just trying their best to destroy our moralities. And these moralities were installed in us by somebody or something. I believe God now. And they are attempting to destroy them. Who would attempt to destroy the baseline morality that was God-given? Satan. So if Satan is trying to destroy our morality, then God must be real.
Okay, again, you know what? It's a mixed argument. So there's a couple notes I took there. First, he says even God as a concept proves that there must be God in some way. This it's half true, but it's a nominalist perception of God. It's this idea that because an effect exists, or because there is an effect, that there must be a cause that we can conceive of that exists. There's a reality that's kind of true. For example, if you find a book on the sidewalk, you say, well, there must be an author. That's true. But his appeal to the morality is where it gets the weakest, because he starts talking about some sort of baseline morality, and he says instilled in us by God, but he hasn't explained what that baseline morality is and why it's binding. And again, this is sort of in contrast to his previous point about all evil existing in the world because of Satan. Well, again, if all evil exists in the world because of Satan, and we don't necessarily have responsibility for that evil, then why are we required to follow the baseline morality at all? What say you?
Well, a couple things. So he's actually, he's probably not interacted much with material, right? So with the philosophical material, but like arguing from the existence of God based on the concept of God, there is somewhat of an accuracy to it, even more so than you could even say there's a sense in which it isn't a nominalist thing because of Anselm's formulation, right? The ontological argument for the existence of God, which isn't necessarily it is coherent. It goes something like that. The God by definition exists, and then the greatest conceivable being has to exist, therefore God exists. It's an interesting argument. I would suggest looking it up. But then when he goes into morality, right? It's just what he doesn't end up realizing is that, well, God binds us to this morality, and it's funny, he's using more or less Christian terms. I mean, Islam would probably use Satan, but would use it in a different way than we would. And then he says, well, God, and he's probably referring to the Christian ethic, because if he was referring to the Islamic ethic, it would be completely arbitrary. So these sins which he wants to, which he rightly wants to condemn, like pedophilia and things like this, you can't necessarily fully condemn on an Islamic paradigm, with all due respect to them, because they're great in many ways. But so I just think he's missing the mark, and it's coming from the fact that his mind just isn't very well trained.
Yeah, I agree. That was a good analysis. Okay, let's go to the next part. Is that Jocko fuel, by the way?
Sure is.
Got to get somebody.
Now, if you want somebody good in the manosphere, Jocko in no way has paid me to say anything of this sort or to advertise his drinks, which are very good. I suggest listening to the Jocko podcast and everything he does, because he is a great influence for sure.
The guy needs to become Catholic, man.
He's a force for good.
He is. All right, let's. Okay, so no salvation outside the church except for Wilson and Jocko.
And Jocko, yeah.
Okay. All right, let's continue.
So, equal and opposite forces, Newton's law proved God. So once I realized God was real, it's like, okay, then you have all these different interpretations of God, which is interesting. What's interesting about the Christianity-Islamic debate is that they're both Abrahamic. And also, people said to me, well, you're not from the Middle East. Why would you be Muslim? And it kind of makes me laugh. I say, Christianity, didn't that all happen in Palestine? Like, all of it comes from the same place, right? I'm not a scholar, so I don't want to get on the scholastic route. But Christianity and Islam have a lot in common. They worship a lot of the same people. Islam has another book, the last book, which was the Seal. And truthfully, if we're going to step away from the scholarship angles and talk about the Bible and the Quran, etc., I look at it in a different angle. I look at the world through a very realistic understanding of force. And I understand that if you're not prepared to defend something, it will be taken and destroyed. I understand that, like we said earlier, violence is the underpinning of all civilized societies. Even when I look at a big tree, I see violence. I understand that tree is the biggest because it destroyed all the other trees around it. If you're not prepared to defend or fight, then you're going to be destroyed. So when I look at Christianity in its current form, I don't think that they can be right in terms of their interpretation of God, because if they were correct, God would give them the strength to defend themselves, and they don't. Christianity doesn't mean anything anymore. If the Christian interpretation of God was correct, then God would be giving them the strength to resist, but they don't resist anything. I don't believe Christians have preserved a single thing in modern time. I know in America there's this hard-line Christians who believe that they're trying hard. They are still failing on a daily basis. And in most of the world, especially in Europe, Christianity is absolutely not a joke. The thing that actually finally converted me was about 3 weeks ago. I'll send you the TikTok. It was the first drag queen Methodist preacher.
Oh, geez, man.
Yeah, but this is the point. If you're tolerant of everything, then you stand for nothing. So once you say I'm a Christian, but I tolerate everything under the name of tolerance, well, then you no longer have any beliefs. So if you have no beliefs, then all of it is garbage. If you're the only way you can worship a God is if that God gives you instructions, and if those instructions are adhered to and respected by the followers, and also if the followers of the particular God, I'm not going to say names, stick up for and defend those beliefs and are prepared to be ridiculed or prepared to be stigmatized. And two, like I said earlier, a bottom line of society's violence, to fight to defend those beliefs. If you
Okay, there's a lot there. I took some notes because there's a lot there. Okay, so let's break this down. So first thing he says, they're both Abrahamic. Is that true? You know what's funny about this? Andrew Tate's a liberal. Andrew Tate is actually philosophically a liberal. He's the thing he hates, because he's a relativist when it comes to the most important thing, which is what leads to this sort of leftist liberalism anyway. This claim that they're both Abrahamic, he sounds like Pope Francis, which he'd probably think is one of the, well, rightfully so. He would think Pope Francis is one of the examples of Christianity gone wrong, the way that Pope Francis has acted, sadly. Abrahamic, while it is true that Islam claims Ishmael is sort of the rightful son, or there's a reality there that's something like that, it's just logically impossible that there would be two sons of the same father of religion, let's call it, but they both be diametrically opposed. They both can't be true at the same time. So appealing to their same father, even if that's true, doesn't make any sense. What say you?
Yeah, well, it's funny because you don't want to dismiss what he's saying there out of hand, right? Because it makes he's appealing to, I think an emotion and a disposition that a lot of people have towards Christianity is that they've just completely given up the ghost, right? He's not the only one pointing this out vis-a-vis the weakness of Christianity and the weakness. Well, I shouldn't say the weakness of Christianity. When I say that, I'm kind of using it equivocally. You get what I mean? But the weakness of the institutions, which is real. It's a very real problem. It's, you mentioned Methodists. It's true of Roman Catholics. It's true of many of the Orthodox. You're not going to escape that, right? Within Christianity or within Islam. He's not the only one. I mean, I'd say who's the one who's articulating this in a more intellectual way and going in a more intellectual direction with it is BAP, right? Who sees that, okay, there's a problem within the Christian church writ large or the Catholic Church as well. So he posits Nietzscheanism, and there's almost a sense in which Tate is positing the same thing, but also trying to adopt a religious framework for it. So he's using Islam as a vehicle for it. And unfortunately, I mean, if you're a Muslim, really, it's really not going to, I would imagine most of the Muslims, although I'm sure they're happy in a way to have him on their side, would think that there's definitely a lot of inconsistency in what he's saying.
Well, yeah. So he mentioned, and there's a part coming up after this where he says he ultimately admits why he chose Islam is because it matches his personal beliefs. Which is, again, okay, you're God, I guess. Then that's the case because you decide what true religion is. So congratulations, God. Good for you. Good, nice to meet you, God Tate. But he says violence is the underpinning of all civilization. No, it's not. Order is the underpinning of all civilization. if in a natural sense. So let's take some historical examples. What led to the downfall of the Roman Empire? Disordered violence within the empire. If you read the annals of history about what was going on when things started to get, screwy in the Western Roman Empire, it was people giving themselves up more and more to their disordered passions. The gladiatorial games were more and more popular. The lynching of Christians, the continual sacrifice of children, and so on and so forth. It was actually and also we should distinguish. There's two types of violence. There's good violence and bad violence. It's good to be violent against an intruder into your home who's trying to hurt your children. It's bad to be the violent intruder. So it's not even the case that violence is good or violence is necessarily the same thing. Now, Rome reemerged in the West when it became ordered and nonviolent in the bad violent sense. And then we had Christendom. Take the example of the Aztecs, for example. The Aztecs were extremely violent. Their civilization didn't actually last that long. People think the Aztecs were around for a really long time before the Spanish got there. They actually weren't. There was a civilization before them that fell as well. And you can see that when you go to Mexico City, and you can see the plaques on the pyramids. They were not built by the Aztecs. What the Spanish did is they saw that they were sacrificing thousands of people, daily and weekly to the sun gods and so on, or Quetzalcoatl and these serpent gods and things like that. And what they did is they put a stop to the violence and then created a stable Christian society. And then what brought Mexico down? Violence from the United States, funded coup in Mexico. Look at all of the dictatorial states that don't last very long. Germany, Soviet, in the sense of history, sure, 50 or 70 years is a long time in the lifetime. It's not a long time historically. They don't last very long. The violent states don't last very long. The only way that a violent state or a state that has sort of the threat of violence lasts a while is if that state lives in a perpetual state of suppression. So if you look at some of the Islamic parts of the world that have lasted, there's a perpetual state of suppression of opposition, no matter if the opposition is correct or not. He also goes on to say, Christianity in its current form. That's a nonsensical statement. There is one church, and there are various sects that appeal to the Christian history but aren't real churches. I couldn't care less what a Methodist thinks. I couldn't care less what a Methodist does. I mean, it's sad that he's using the name of Christ, but he's not Christian. It's not a Christian church. I'm sorry. That's what it is. And here is where, one more thing, and then I'll get to the most important point about what he says. He says most of the world in Christianity and most of the world is dead. That's actually not true. There are plenty of places in the world where Christianity is thriving, at least in the general sense. Like it's exploding in Africa. It just is. I know it's not, the Catholic Church is not doing as well as people say it is in Africa. That's another conversation. The Pentecostals are exploding and taking a lot of Catholics away. But in the general sense of Christianity is exploding in Africa. It's actually exploding in Latin America. Again, many Catholics are leaving and becoming Protestants, but the numbers are actually huge of the people that are going to various denominational churches. And Islam is not exploding in those areas. Also, in Muslim societies, Christianity is extremely strong, even if suppressed. But no matter what they do to try to stamp out the Christian minority, they can't. So on a basic level, his argument that Christianity is essentially dead worldwide, he's basically saying because in England and in Canada and in Germany, it's really bad, it's dead in the whole world. That's just not the case. In many places, it's actually still completely strong. Here's the last thing that he said there, and then we'll go to the next clip. He says, if their interpretation, this is a weird thing, if their interpretation of God was real, okay, if their interpretation of God was real, God would give them the strength to defend themselves. Well, we'll see in this next clip, he's making the same argument as the bad thief beside Christ on the cross. The good thief, St. Dismas, says, we deserve what's happening to us because we're righteous. The bad thief says, if you truly were the Christ, you'd take yourself down. And this is a misunderstanding of humility. This is a misunderstanding of sacrifice. This is a misunderstanding of God. And Scripture gives us an analogy that one of those men, those thieves, one goes to heaven, the other presumably burns in hell. So follow Andrew Tate's line of thinking, and you'll probably burn in hell. Okay, so let's look at this last clip here. And I think this is where the swear word is, so I apologize for the pearl clutching.
If you have a belief system that nobody will fight to defend, then you don't have beliefs. Just like feminism. If nobody fights to defend it, it goes away. Like Christianity, if nobody stands up for the rules, it goes away. There is one religion on the planet today in which people stand up for the rules, they stick by the rules, they refuse to be mocked, and they refuse to completely throw away their values and belief systems under the guise of tolerance. Because they don't want to be tolerant of everything. They said, no, we're not tolerant of everything, because when you're tolerant of everything, you have no morality. That's what we talked about earlier. Baseline morality means there's some things you're intolerant of because you're a moral person. So to be moral, you have to be intolerant to a degree. There's one religion on the planet, and that's Islam. So if I'm gonna worship God, and I'm gonna worship God in a way which is true to my own personal beliefs, also what I understand about the world, what I understand about strength, what I understand about defending ideals, then there's only one religion on earth I can respect. I can't respect Christians anymore. They set Notre Dame on fire. Imagine that was the other way around. Like, think about it for a second. I say this all the time. People walk around with T-shirts. Jesus is gay in TVs. They're making fun of Christianity on TV. They're mocking your God in front of your face, and Christians don't say a word. They don't say a word. They will take a preacher of whatever background, which directly contradicts your holy book, and put him in a church to teach to your children, and they will not say a fucking word. And then they sit there and go, well, they say tolerant because they're cowards. But the truth is this. If your interpretation of God and the world was right, I don't believe God would allow you to sit there and be such a fucking coward. That's what I don't believe. I don't think that God would allow you to do that. I think he'd say, no, you need to defend our ideals because our ideals are good for humanity, and Christians fail to defend them. So if they fail to defend them, they do not exist. There's only one.
Okay, there's a lot of logical leaps there. The last thing he says, if you fail to defend them, they don't exist. That doesn't make any sense. Something could exist and still be defeated. like Canada exists, but no one's defending. It's defenseless right now. But like, I live here; it does exist. I can assure you that it's more real than Italy, as they would say on Avoiding Babylon. Okay, what are your impressions from that clip?
Before I criticize, I will say that it's a fair gut check for
yes
for Christians, for Protestants and Catholics or the Orthodox, that societally we are bending over for sure.
Mm-hmm.
As a whole, I think about it pretty often because I think we probably all drive past Planned Parenthood or something like that, and we've probably all seen heretical preachers and priests in our church and things like that. And let's put it, and what are we supposed to do? I don't have the answer for that, but the answer can't. He's right that the answer can't be nothing for sure.
Yes.
And what we do need as Catholics especially have to be conscious of Tate's criticisms here. And they came first from Nietzsche. We have to be conscious of Nietzsche's criticisms of Christians potentially falling into what he called a slave morality, in effect being weak and feckless and using Christianity as a vehicle to push your weakness and trying to manipulate the words of Christ to make it a social justice warrior gospel or something like that. So 100%. He's on the money there. We as traditional Catholics, as the ones who hold the true faith, as the ones who, allegedly believe what we say, we need to be stronger. We need to be doing more. We do need to be acting in many respects. All that said, it doesn't make any logical sense to go from God is not giving you the strength and the will to defend your religion, therefore your religion's false. That's actually what they call the genetic fallacy, right? Because the person that is saying X is weak or that it discredits it. It's kind of a combination of the genetic fallacy and the ad hominem fallacy. Just because it comes from a bad source doesn't make it false, right? That would be the case here. So it's an obviously leap in logic. I mean, Tate has kind of shown that he's not familiar with, probably rudimentary philosophy and rudimentary apologetics, because he's making sort of bizarre attempts at making arguments that don't really make sense, or once you put them to the proof, it's very silly. That said, we have to do more, but Tate, while being he's very influential, and it's unfortunate because he's obviously not really much of a lettered individual, but
yeah. And this is why Andrew Tate appeals to so many young men, because we have a very uneducated, and this is not to say we're smarter, but it's just, listen, we know what education is. Look at my bookshelf there, and, there's some Plato, and there's some Augustine, and there's some Aquinas, and there's some, biblical commentary, and there's some Dickens, and there's some Chesterton. I mean, you read, if everyone would just read, Plato's Republic, Nicomachean Ethics, or even just selections thereof, even just books about those things, explaining them. If you just picked 1,000 pages total and read 200 pages appealing to one, even if, I know some people would say, Aristotle's way better than Plato, but just understand Plato. just understand at least some ancient thought, understand a little bit of the arguments for the existence of God, read one C.S. Lewis book, just read 1,000 pages total of real philosophers and theologians, and you'd intellectually run circles around Andrew Tate in a fair combat on with proper terms. Okay, he says, sorry, and that's why he appeals to so many young men, is because we live in an extremely uneducated age, in the sense of everything is a mile wide and an inch deep. People get their master's degrees and they've written a lot of papers, but they've never actually said anything worth saying. But they've been told the whole time that they've said something worth saying, because the people that are evaluating them are postmodernists and are intellectually bankrupt in the first place. Okay, so he says, nobody will fight to defend. That's just objectively not true. Again, the people that fight the hardest for Christianity live in Muslim countries. So, and he says, Christians are no longer intolerant of anything, and therefore they won't fight for it. With all due respect, not to pretend that abortion has magically disappeared in the United States, but why did Roe versus Wade end? It's because Christians fought really hard for 40 years to make it happen. Like, let's be honest, people can be cynical all they want, but all of the advocacy, all of the lobbying, all of the prayers, all of the protesting, all of the counseling of people, changing the hearts and minds of people in America about abortion was what the Christians did. And that's why we got to the point where you could have enough of a political inertia that it was the will of the people, as cringe as that sounds, in the pure democracy sense, that presidents actually felt compelled to put pro-life judges on the court. And they only did that because Christians changed the heart and minds of the populace. That's how democracy so-called works. If the society was completely ambivalent towards abortion, Trump and any of them never would have had the necessity to try and put a Clarence Thomas or a Gorsuch or a Comey Barrett on there. For all their failings that there may be, Clarence Thomas I don't think has many failings. He's pretty amazing.
He's great.
Yeah, but the point is, you see, like it's just not like we have had one of the most clear pieces of evidence that Christians actually in America, compared to a lot of the world, fight really, really hard for what Andrew Tate calls the baseline morality. Right. And that's in the historical records. And I don't know how he can just miss that. And he goes on to say, they set Notre Dame on fire. Who set it on fire? I mean, it was it was either some sort of inside job. What are you supposed to do? What, go take over the government or something? Like, I don't know what he's trying to get at here. It's like some either inside job did something bad to Notre Dame, or some vandal did something bad. We don't know who it was. This is a useless statement. This is like, a mosque got set on fire in New York. Come on, guys. It's like, well, was it an electrical fire? Like, I don't know. You can't just because something bad happened to a historic Christian place. This is not an argument that Christians have backed down from defending historic places. It's just something that happened. And then, again, The places on earth where Christians are the strongest are in Muslim countries. I mean, how many Africans are blown up every year at Easter? And they still go to mass. So, this is a very...
Excuse me, they're Easter worshipers. Remember that?
Oh, that's right. Obama told us they were Easter worshipers. That's right. Yeah, another part of this too, Andrew Tate said Muslims and Christians worship a lot of the same people. I don't think Muslims worship saints, although Shiites do have veneration of certain saintly type people. But even there, it just shows, it's like, what are you even saying about Islam? I don't even know what you're saying. I think last thing I'll say is, this type of attack, you're right. It's gut check. A lot of Christians are soft. We know this. This is why we're traditional Catholics. This is why we don't go to the Novus Ordo, is because everything he's saying is generally speaking true in the Novus Ordo, and I don't want to be a part of it. However, it's a very diabolical tactic in the technical sense of the psychological side of it, is that he's basically pointing out your shame so that you will make a radical shift in your religious principles. And that's the danger in this kind of things. Yes, there's a gut check, but no, the solution is not Andrew Tate's. That's what I think.
Correct. Yeah. And it's I thought too, it's like, it's very much a significant, like, ignorance of history, because it's like, well, we have now where, the church is struggling. I mean, it's an ignorance of history and what's going on now, currently. I mean, he's not familiar with the traditional Catholic movement, probably the people that are fighting back. He's not familiar with probably, Archbishop Lefebvre and a guy like a tough Catholic priest like a Father James Maudsley or something like that. But he also doesn't know about, how the Muslims were routed in the Crusades, by the Catholics. I mean, we have, we've lost Crusades to them too, but I mean, we've exchanged. We've had victories over the Muslims. He probably doesn't know about how St. Francis went to Saladin to try and make himself a martyr. And the history of strength within Christianity. That's only now really it's only a recent problem. This Christian, it's somewhat of a recent problem. This these weak men in the institutions, but it's an aberration. It's not. It's the exception.
It's not the norm.
It's the exception proving the rule, is what it is.
Yeah, and Muslims lose their faith outside of Muslim countries. You live in a pluralist society in New York. I used to live in a big city, relative few 100,000 people city. Okay. And I lived in Ottawa for a while where there's tons of Muslims there in a relative scale. Within 1 or 2 generations, they're just like the rest of the world.
Right.
They contracept. They don't have any definitive teaching against contraception. I know that in some of the more devout Muslim countries, the grand imam or whatever may make regulations where, like, it's completely unacceptable except in certain cases. So in a general sense, there's no contraception. They have big families. That's true. But Muslim families in Ontario, after the first generation, they have 1 or 2 kids. Women all go get jobs and go get degrees and become feminists. They're just feminists with hijabs on. And then the feminists co-opt the hijabs to make it seem like it's some sort of sign of femininity.
It's a cultural diversity thing.
Yeah, it's like Ilhan Omar. She's a Muslim.
Yeah, Islam. I mean, if anything, Islam in a lot of what in the United States has been co-opted by left wingers.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there are some outliers, like there's like Dearborn, Michigan, where it's super Muslim majority, and in that place they did have a fight back against the school board. They did that. Yes. They basically, but again, that's like, this is the thing about any cultural reality. Let's just be to the baseline culture. If you go somewhere where you're a minority, you assimilate. So right. Sure, he looks at a place like Saudi Arabia and he says, oh, look, Saudi Arabia is, super Muslim and there's no abortion, which is great. In fact, I actually read an article by Peter Kosniewski a couple of years ago where he was relaying a story he had from a friend who was Australian but who had lived in Saudi Arabia for a time. And he was actually lamenting that he kind of missed living in Saudi Arabia because he lived near the border of Oman, I think. So he was actually able to go to mass every Sunday. And he was an expat, so he'd go back and forth. But he said it was actually really nice waking up in a country where there was only traditional marriage and no abortion and basically no divorce, and there was no pornography. He said it was actually kind of a dream. Yeah, that's true. But that doesn't happen outside of Saudi Arabia. It doesn't happen in Lebanon even. It doesn't happen in Turkey. You know, I mean, Turkey is basically a European country, you know, with all the trappings of modernity in many ways. Doesn't happen in Chechnya. You know, Malaysia is a Muslim place. I know people from Malaysia. It's totally secular in so many ways. And in the places where they keep this baseline morality, as he talks about, it's very oppressive. So they're able to achieve this baseline morality, which is great in a relative sense. But I mean, you go to jail for being a Christian, you know, and this isn't just the case in Muslim countries. It's also illegal in India, I'm pretty sure, in most provinces to actually evangelize, even though that's where St. Thomas the Apostle was. So it's not just Muslim countries, but so all arguments, they're historically ignorant, they're culturally ignorant, they're theologically ignorant, they're philosophically ignorant, and they're religiously ignorant. But what more should we expect from a guy who basically made his living off of pornography?
It's that simple.
It's that simple. All right. We didn't say like this video, subscribe to this channel at all during the show because I suck at that. So, Joe, that's your fault. You're supposed to remind me. That's your job now. Okay.
Maybe I'll start doing the advertisements. I'll be very heavy-handed. You know, like the video, subscribe, leave a comment for the algorithm.
Yeah.
Do all of that. Send it to your friends.
Yeah.
Send it to your enemies.
You know, on this StreamYard software, there's like a ticker that you can put past the bottom. I should probably just put one that's going the whole time that says, please like and subscribe.
Leave a comment.
Oh, well.
Send
what
it
do
like
I know?
Lofton or something. I don't know.
What do I know? I'm just a guy. I'm just a dad with a webcam, as Taylor Marshall says.
So
all right.
true.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.